Please like and comment below and subscribe and share for more first-person encounters.
As of Bigfoot Stalks Boy Scouts in Mount Hood National Forest. I was active in the Boy Scouts of America, BSA, for a few years, up until about age 15. Our troop was fairly small and poorly organized, with a scoutmaster who was an uninspired old man known to drink a lot. He often drove us out into some remote locations of the PNW and in around the Mount Hood National Forest. We usually ended up being the only troop at campsites that were long neglected and poorly maintained at best. We never attended any of the scout jamborees. The one criteria that seemed to matter to him was the presence of some kind of single-occupancy shelter. Like an old mini-cabin or some standing structure he could hull up by himself with his little propane heater, folding cot and Canadian mist. We usually saw him twice a day, for breakfast and dinner. The rest of the time, we fended for ourselves, and the dynamics of our troop sometimes devolved into something along the lines of Lord of the Flies. During my time in that troop, on 2 occasions, my friend and I came across some very distinct, 5'2", very human, very huge prints. One grouping was located on the far side of a lake, accessible only by canoe, which at one point we had to drag over a beaver dam. There was a muddy cove where a creek drained into the lake. We were marveling at all afresh the various animal tracks imprinted in the mud. Bear, deer, cougar and/or bobcat, when we noticed the improbable bear humanoid prints that were ridiculously huge. We looked at them very closely, and I'll never forget observing the fine detail within the prints that were pressed in quite deep. My friend said at the time, the creases inside the prints looked similar to what you'd see on your palms or the bottoms of your own feet. Both my friend and I were aware of the Bigfoot legends, but we never took it seriously. Shortly after inspecting those footprints, we both felt a little spooked and decided to head the canoe and paddle back to our campsite. If someone had put in the elaborate effort to prank some Boy Scouts or campers with fake footprints, they chose a location almost guaranteed to never be noticed. That incident, along with another, much freakier, one in a different location, gravely changed my mindset as to the likelihood of these creatures being all too real. The other freaky experience also didn't involve a sighting on my part, but it was one of those you would have had to have been there situations. This very well could have taken place during the camping excursion and location, as where my friend I found the prints on the far side of the lake. If not then and there, it was around that same time period. It was after dinner and the sun was down, but the moon was pretty bright. 2 other guys my age went for a night hike, basically just goofing around. One of those 2 guys, Bruce, I also considered a friend. He was in my grade and we attended the same school. Bruce was tall, husky guy for his age. He had a mellow disposition and got good grades in school. He was also deaf, or significantly so, since he had one of those old hearing aids that connected to a control box, about the size of a pack of cigarettes. I never saw him use sign language, but he was effective at communicating with rough words and gestures. Anyway, Bruce and the other guy went for their hike, apparently intending to go just down to the lake and back. They didn't bring anything with them, not even a flashlight. I don't think they were gone for more than 45 minutes tops, when they both came bursting back into the campsite area in a total state of panic, bordering on hysteria. The other guy, can't recall his name, was sobbing and shaking, kept frantically looking back in the direction they'd come from. What really alarmed me was seeing Bruce in tears also. He had accrued a lot deep woods camping experiencing and was no wuss. Both of them were babbling over the top of each other, making quite a commotion. It was enough to rouse our old troop leader from his hidey hole to see what was going on. We finally got some detail out of the guys, which was unsettling to everybody. Supposedly, they hadn't quite made it to the lake when Bruce felt something was pacing them, parallel to their path. They said whatever it was walking between the trees. At first the other kid didn't pick on it, and was bemused when Bruce kept trying to share what he was noticing. They kept walking for a bit until the other kid became aware of what Bruce had been trying to explain. Whatever was pacing them was laying down footfalls, massive enough to reverberate through the ground. I think what really scared them at first was noticing how the heavy steps were keeping pace with their own, as if it was stalking them. Whenever they stopped, it stopped. At some point, they reached a spot where there was wider spacing between the trees. In the moonlight they both saw the silhouette of a huge tall bipedal shape, 20 to 30 feet away, darting between the tree trunks. Bruce described it as taller than an NBA player, but way thicker than Andre the Giant. Where their stories diverged was, after they both fled in panic, Bruce insisted that it didn't give chase, but his friend swore that he could hear it crashing through the foliage behind them, most of the way back to camp. I should note that our ragtag scout troop included a couple of guys, a bit older than the average age in our troop, who were full-on bullies, and considered themselves badasses. Both of those douchebags, who would normally mock anyone for being a pansy, were visibly spooked by the drama, nervously shining their flashlights around the dark perimeter of our campsite. But of course neither of them volunteered to venture out and investigate. Our old scoutmaster looked a bit rattled too, since this was not the typical drama he usually had to contend with. I think seeing Bruce in such a state of fear had an impact on him. I'm fairly certain he believed at least those two scouts saw something out of the ordinary, something that scared the piss out of them, thereby interrupting his evening date with some booze. After things finally simmered down, before retreating back to his personal space, he told us to make sure the fire was out and hit the racks. At that older campground, our accommodations were crude structures like a cross between tiny log cabins and a yurt. There were no bunks or anything, just a floor of wood planks. The roofs were large squares of old canvas stretched fastened across the top. Those yurt cabin structures were drafty and cold. Very uncomfortable. It was at least a couple of hours before dawn when me and a couple of the guys awoke to the sound feeling of something walking around the campsite, at times getting really close to the yurts. I don't recall it feeling as being something massive or heavy, but two dogs were absolutely freaking out, howling and whimpering like their lives were in danger. Here's where my memory has some gaps. Our troop didn't travel with include dogs. My best recollection is that particular campground had some guy acting as a seasonal caretaker with a key to the gate, living in a shack or an old trailer ways off from our camp, and he might have owned dogs. I just don't remember seeing this person at any point. Sure, the sounds we heard that morning could have easily been from any number of catalogued critters, but the way those dogs sounded was really something. I still recall how scared my friend Bruce was, as he frantically tried to describe what he'd seen. That normally mellow guy looked like he'd just witnessed something very frightening. The guy was literally in tears, extremely convinced of what he'd seen. For whatever reason, Bruce didn't stick around our troop long after that. Maybe just one more camp out at most. Over the following years I saw him a few times in the school hallways, but never had a chance to ask him to elaborate on that bad scare. NP.
Bigfoot along the Shenango River. Had my encounter in western Pennsylvania near the Shenango River in Crawford County. This was in 2008 when I was a teen. I was night fishing in the pond across the street from my family friend's horse farm I was staying at for the summer. The side of the pond I was fishing from is an open field from the lawn to the road, and the opposite side has a thick oak forest leading up to the shore that is massive and stretches for a few miles in width and probably 10 miles long. His is the only house in the area, his nearest neighbor is almost 3 miles up the road. I had been out for around an hour and already had 4 10 to 15 pounds catfish on my stringer, so was more just enjoying the quiet and sky more than anything. I started hearing some rustling 100 yards or so into the woods across the pond from me. At first I just thought it was the dog digging something up until I realized he was still laying beside me. Then I started to make out 4 human-like figures that kept walking up near the edge of the tree line across the pond, and then walking back to where I couldn't make them out anymore. This went on for around 20 minutes and was freaking me out because the family friend lives by himself and I was the only person there that night besides him, so I knew it wasn't just him messing with me. Then I stopped seeing them, but could still hear the occasional noises of something moving in the woods just out of sight for another 20 minutes or so. It was almost 1 a.m. at that point, and the fish weren't biting anymore. But I was too freaked out to take my eyes off the woodline long enough to pack up my tackle box and rod and clean the fish. Then I saw one of the figures come up to the edge of the woodline again, and it heaved a rock that had to have been about 40 pounds or so, judging by the splash it made. That darn near made it to the middle of the pond, which is roughly 60 yards wide. I was scared to death and immediately jumped up and started sprinting the quarter mile back to the house. I left all of my gear there, fishing line still cast out, stringer of fish still in the pond in front of me, etc. My tackle box and gear is still my most prized possessions to this day, but that's how deathly afraid I was in the moment. Luckily the dog freaked out as much as I did and beat me back to the house, because I didn't think about him at all either. I ran inside and started to tell the family friend what happened. He didn't even bat an eye, just told me to grab the spotlight we used for coon hunting, and he grabbed his rifle. It took maybe 5 minutes from the time I booked it in fear till we were back down at the pond. The stringer of fish was gone, and the whole tub of chicken livers I was using as bait was nowhere in sight. I reeled in my line, packed up my tackle box, and we walked around the woods spotting for around a half hour, and didn't find the stringer of fish or blue bucket from the chicken livers anywhere, nor any animals or anything. We went back to the house and he told me that he has had a family of Bigfoot living on his property for a few years now, but didn't want people to think he was crazy, so never brought it up. I had a lot of experiences on that property that summer and since, but none that intense, just a lot of being followed through the woods while hunting or collecting mushrooms and berries, and hearing them talking in the woods around me. GT.
Appalachian, Tennessee Bigfoot. I grew up in the southern Appalachians, Crab Orchard Mountains in Tennessee to be precise. My much older brother and his best friend saw a Bigfoot in the 60s while camping on the Oak River. No guessing about it. I always believed him. A buddy and I were back there in the early 2000s. Late January, we're camping and riding ATVs, and it's staying cold, around -8 degrees that night. We were back at the camp, warming around the fire, quietly talking. All of a sudden, the most ear-piercing bellowing, shrieking of the sort that I have never heard anywhere on this planet. It had the volume of an elephant, it seemed. It moved around our campsite in the dark, staying out of the glow of the campfire. Jerry shined his big flashlight all around, and we didn't see anything, but it screamed at us another 3 times. Then we heard what sounded like a damn moose running through the woods. There aren't any moose around there, let me tell you. Jerry and I kept our weapons handy for a couple more hours, talking about what just happened. I asked him, you know what it had to be, don't you? And he said the word Bigfoot, but to this day, he doesn't even like to talk about it with me. It changed his perception of what is out in those woods though. Before that, he was Mr. Nothing scares me. He doesn't even go out in the boonies anywhere near as much as he did before that night. If I'm lying, I'm dying. Well, you know what I'm saying. It's the truth. G.
This is Lon Strickler. If you like this program, it would help us if you would give it a thumbs up. Then subscribe and click the bell icon so you get notification when we upload new first-person encounters. We have many more to come very soon. And by the way, if you have a suggestion or an experience of your own, please leave a comment.